All right. Thanks for that. Wow, you guys are awesome. Wasn't that a great worship time? Yeah, did you have fun? That was good. You know, I just want to thank everybody who put so much work into this whole camp, right? So many people have put work into this camp. They've been practicing. The worship team has been practicing, I can tell. A lot of practices. That stuff doesn't just happen by accident, right? So thank you so much for all the work that you did for that. All right. Yes. Do we have the PowerPoints up? Oh, there we go. Cool. That's my wife, Hiran. She was born in Korea and raised in the jungles in Papua New Guinea. And we have 4 kids. There's kid number 1, Andrew. He just turned 16. And he's one of the top volleyball players. Really good volleyball player. We have Kiara, who's 14. Loves to play the viola. Acacia is 12. And she loves bugs. Does anybody else love bugs here? We have any other? Really? That's awesome. Yeah. Acacia loves bugs. And then we have Sierra, who's 7. And yeah, she wanted you to make sure that you saw her boots. Do you see her boots? Yeah? Okay, good. All right, cool. And that's Sierra. And then we have a dog, and we have a cat, and we have a leopard gecko. I know, isn't he cute? You gotta admit he's cute, right? Got a little smile. And then we have a hairy spider. There's our pet tarantula. Cool. So there we go. That's the introduction to the family. If you come visit us, you can see our dog, our cat, our leopard gecko, and our hairy spider. You know, we just sang a lot of songs to God. And I want to talk just for a second about who he is. Like, who is God, actually? The God that we're singing to, right? How does he introduce himself to us? You know, introductions are extremely important. I obsess over introductions because introductions, they help the audience understand why they should listen to someone, right? And introductions can change based on who the audience is, right? Sometimes if I'm speaking to a group of worship leaders, then it's like Derek has led worship all over the world. He's written worship courses and stuff like that. If I'm speaking to a group of pastors, then it's like, oh, they want to know where I went to school and all that stuff. If I speak to a group of travelers, I can give them some tips on how to pack their suitcase because I've been in 99 countries. So introductions can change based on who the audience is, right? And introductions are really, really important because they help the audience understand why they should listen to someone. Now, I just gave you a little introduction to my family. And when I think about God, I think about how has he introduced himself to us. Now, you know he wrote a book, right? When he wrote the book, it looks something, let me just go, there it is. It looks something like this, right, when he wrote his book. And then later on it became this, and now it's this, right? And pretty soon it's going to be this, right? I know, I'm looking forward to the virtual reality Bible. That's going to be awesome. The format has changed, right? We don't all read scrolls anymore. I don't think I've ever read a scroll. Have you guys ever read a scroll? I've never read a scroll. You haven't either? Okay, so I'm not the only one. Yeah, I've never read a scroll. And people barely read books anymore, but now we have this, right? So this is what we're using, and soon we'll have that. So how the Bible is presented to us changes, but the content, the stuff that's in the Bible, never changes, right? That is the Word of God. And so when God wrote his book, there's some things that he thought we should know. And at the very beginning of the book, the very first 3 words that we read, what are they? In the beginning. I'm glad you know that. Here's what he thought we should know. In the beginning. Now, when he said this, when he wrote this, he was basically saying that he was in the beginning. I know. he was there. He was not just outside of it, but he was actually in, and it was the beginning. The beginning of what? Yeah, the world. You're absolutely right. At the beginning of everything that we know about, right? There was a beginning to it. Now, let me see. What's your name? Looney? Okay, and what's your name? What is it? Chingpi? Okay, so imagine that Looney and I are going to go see a movie, and we're going to meet you there, okay? And Chingpi's there. She's on time because that's the person that she is. And Looney's late because she's with me and I'm late to everything. And so we get there 20 minutes late, okay? Now, because you're amazing, Chingpi, thank you very much. You saved seats for us. We get there, we're 20 minutes late to the movie, and we get there, we sit down next to you, and the movie's already started, right? We've missed the first 20 minutes. And I turn to Looney and I say, what did I miss? And Looney would look at me going, what are you talking about? I just came at the same time you did, right? That would be kind of silly for me to ask Looney, what did I miss? Because we were both 20 minutes late, right? What we should do is ask Chingpi, we should say, all right, so what did we miss? And then you can fill us in on the 20 minutes, right? You can say, well, that guy, his granddaughter just ran away and they're looking for her and the whole neighborhood's looking. It's like, okay, now we know what happened, right? Now, isn't it amazing to you that we have so many people who talk about the beginning, but they were never there at the beginning? And the stuff they say at the beginning, actually, it doesn't even make sense because they weren't even there at the beginning. Instead of talking to the person who was there from the beginning to find out more about the beginning. Does that make sense? So when he starts his book and he introduces himself to us, he tells us that he was in the beginning and that it was the beginning. And that's why God is the person who knows everything about everything. Because he was there, just like Jingpi was there at the beginning of the movie. God was there from the very beginning, and so he knows everything about what happened, right? Now, the next thing that God tells us is that God gives us his most important title. Say it to the person next to you. This is God's most important title. Okay, tell them again, just in case they weren't paying attention. Tell them, this is God's most important title. Now, what do I mean by that? What is a title? What is a title? If somebody is a medical doctor, what title do we call them by? Doctor, right? We call them by doctor. And why do we call them by doctor? It's to help. Right. And that's why, like, I've been on an airplane, and they're like, is there a doctor on the plane? And why are they asking that? Because they're asking because somebody needs help, right, from a medical doctor. So they ask that. So his title is helpful to us because it helps us understand what he does, right? Now, God's most important title is mentioned right here at the beginning. And you say, well, Derek, how do you know it's his most important title? Well, because it's at the very beginning, and because it's the one that's come under the most attack, right? Because when you say Jesus is the Prince of Peace, nobody gets angry at you about that. And when you say God is provider, nobody goes, oh, no, he's not. But when you say that God is the creator, ooh, people get all upset, right? They get upset. Why do they get so upset about the fact that God is the creator? We'll talk about that later. But it's his most important title is that he's the creator. It's his first identifying title, creator, and it's his most important title. Why is it his most important title? Because it was mentioned right at the beginning, and because it's the one that comes under the most attack. Now, here's the thing about God, and this is awesome, is that God has never stopped creating because he's a creator. And one of the things that he's creating is a new you. We read about that in these passages here, that God is creating a new you. Now, why is it important to understand that God is a creator? And by the way, when I think of God, I don't think of his hands to look like this. Because at the very heart of who God is, he's an artist. Do we have any artists here? You like to draw? Yeah? What do you like to draw? Oh, really? That's pretty amazing. Piggies. I wish I could draw piggies. I can't draw piggies. When I think about God, I think of his hands looking more like this, right? Or like this, right? Because that's what artists' hands look like. Or this guy, he's building a canoe, right? That's what his hands look like. Now, here's another thing that God thought we should know. And I'll tell you a story in just a second, but I just want to kind of give you some understanding here of what I'm talking about. Because God is there right at the beginning, and the next thing that happened is that he says, in the beginning, God created, right? And then the next thing that happened is that God reveals himself. How does he reveal himself? He uncloaks himself, and how does he do that? What did he reveal himself as? No? Well, let me ask you this. What was the light that God created on day one? Because he didn't create the sun and the moon and the stars until later on, right? So what was the light that we see in day one? What was that? What did you say? It was himself, right? It was a manifestation of himself. That's right. You guys are so smart. Because later on, he creates the sun and the moon and the stars. So we know that it wasn't that light when he said, light be revealed or light be seen, which is what he said in Hebrew. He said, light be seen or light be revealed. And so right from the very beginning, and I think it was probably not this kind of a light. That'd be boring. I think when God said, light be revealed, it was probably more like this kind of a light, right? Or maybe like this kind of a light. I know, look at these pictures. They're from the Hubble telescope. That's pretty crazy, huh? These are like universes and galaxies and stuff. And so right from the beginning, God introduces himself, and he says that he can be seen, he can be known, and he speaks. Right? Because it says in there, and God said, let there be light. Do you know how many times in the Bible it says, and God said, and the Lord said, and God commanded, and the Lord commanded? Over 2,700 times in the Bible. So God speaks right at the very beginning, and he speaks through the whole Bible. We'll talk more about how we hear his voice later. Now, one time I was speaking on this, and I was on a stage just like this, and I was talking about this, and all of a sudden something really weird happened. It's not happening now, but it happened back then. And I was on this stage, I was talking, and all of a sudden, I couldn't move my legs from my waist down. It was like my legs were stuck in concrete, and I couldn't move them. And I could move my body like this, but I couldn't move my legs. And I didn't know what to do. I was in a meeting just like this. I was talking about how God is the creator, and all of a sudden, I couldn't move my legs. So I just said to somebody, I said, hey, I can't move my legs. And they just looked at me like that. And I thought, this is weird. I can't move my legs. I tried again, couldn't move my legs. So I said again, I can't move my legs. And they all just stared at me. And then this one guy looks at me and he says, can you move your legs? And I said, no, that's what I'm saying. I can't move my legs. And so they all kind of stared at me, and I didn't know what to do. This had never happened to me before. And you know what I was thinking? I was speaking in the morning, so I was thinking about lunch. And I was like, how am I going to get to lunch if I can't move my legs? They're going to have to cut me out of this stage, and they're going to have to carry me in some weird way to lunch. And that's what I was thinking about. And then this one guy raised his hand, and I said, yes. He said, do you want us to pray for you? I said, yeah, that'd be great. So they all got up, and they laid hands on my legs. I still couldn't move them. Right before that happened, there was a guy who was sitting right there where you're sitting, and he was this big guy from Tonga, the island of Tonga, and God makes them really big in Tonga, big bones. He's a big former rugby player, and he gets up on the stage. I don't know what he's going to do. He gets on the stage, he lowers his shoulder, and he runs straight at me as if he's going to tackle me. And he puts his shoulder right into my hip, and I mean, he outweighed me by probably 200 pounds. And he comes flying across the stage, hits me with his shoulder in my hip, and I don't even move, not even a little bit. And he falls back on the stage, and he goes, oh, he can't move his legs. And I said, that's what I've been saying. I can't move my legs. So then they all come up and they all decide they're going to pray for me, which felt kind of weird to have everybody's hands on my legs. And they're like praying for me. And all of a sudden, I'm trying to listen to what they're praying, right? And I still don't know what's happening. This has never happened to me before. And I'm like, this is really weird. I mean, if you were standing up on stage and all of a sudden you can't move your legs, it's weird, right? So they're praying, and this one guy says, God, help him to move his legs. I'm like, yeah, I like that prayer. And then another person says, in the name of Jesus, move your legs. Didn't work. And then all of a sudden, this other guy, he starts crying. And I mean, not like, like that kind of crying, but like that kind of crying. I'm like, oh my gosh. And then this other person starts crying. And pretty soon this other person starts crying, and another person starts crying. I'm like, why are they crying? Then I thought, should I be crying? Because they're my legs. I didn't really feel like crying. So I'm standing there and I'm wondering, what on earth is going on? Well, the guy who started crying, by now all of them are crying. Like everybody's crying. It's like 36 people. They're all crying. Like kneeling over here crying. They're over there crying. People around my legs are crying. And I'm wondering, what on earth is going on? And all of a sudden I hear the prayer that this one guy who is crying, I hear what he's praying. And then I hear the prayer of the other girl who is crying, and I hear what she's praying. And you know what they're praying? They're asking God for forgiveness. And you know what they're asking God for forgiveness for? They're asking him for forgiveness for believing the lie of evolution. And they were saying, oh God, you are the creator. You're the creator. And I thought that was interesting because they wanted me to speak on hearing God's voice, but they didn't believe that he spoke at the beginning. If you don't believe he spoke at the beginning, why do you think you'd hear his voice now? Right? And it's like I was speaking on God as creator, and all of a sudden God just grabbed my legs and said, we have to deal with this first before you go any further. And so they're all asking God for forgiveness for believing the lie of evolution and saying, God, you are the creator. And as I heard them praying that, all of a sudden my knee moved, and this girl looks up and she's like, can you move your legs? And I said, I can move my legs. And I can move my legs again. You know what that showed me? It showed me how important the title is of God as creator. Because if he is the creator, which he is, if he is the creator, suddenly that means he knows everything about everything. Everything that was, everything that is right now, everything that will be. He knows everything about your life. He knows how the things that you want to change in your life, he knows how to change them. The things that you want to fix in your life, he knows how to fix them. The relationships that are broken in your life, he knows how to solve that. The pain that you feel because of something somebody said to you, he knows how to heal that. He knows everything about everything. Isn't that incredible? And so that's why it's so important to understand that he's the creator. And he's not the darkness, but he's the light, right? And he speaks to us. Well, how does he speak? Well, lots of different ways. He speaks through his word, right? He speaks through the Bible. But something doesn't quite make sense when you read the Bible and you read all these people that had great conversations with God, great talks with God, but they didn't have a Bible. Noah didn't have a Bible, right? He had great conversations with God, right? And Moses didn't have a Bible, and he had good conversations with God. And not just men, but women had conversations with God, like Hagar. One of my favorite questions that God asked her was, where have you come from? Where are you going? It was a great question. And so people in the Bible, how did they hear God? Because they didn't have a Bible, right? How did they know stuff about God? How did they have these conversations with God? Well, in Romans chapter 1, it tells us that we can know things about God. We can understand things. See the bottom of that slide there? We can understand things about God from what has been made. So this means when we look at something like this is, by the way, this is, I think, my favorite desert in the world. This is the White Desert. It's on the border of Egypt and Libya. And these salt formations are huge. They're giant salt formations. Like the one on the right there, like if you were standing there, you'd be like, at the very bottom of it. That's how big it is. And when you look at this, what does this tell us about God? And what does this tell us about God? Do you know anybody who can make this? I don't. Right? What does this tell us about God? What does this tell us about God? I mean, look at all of these unique, amazing things. It tells us all of these crazy things about God. What does something like this tell us about God? I know. Would you want this running at you when you're in the middle of your yard or something? I wouldn't either. You know, when I think about Jesus, I don't think about like Jesus. I think about Jesus as the warrior, right? Sword coming from his mouth, double-edged sword coming from his mouth, and eyes blazing like fire. I love that picture of Jesus. And we can see aspects of who God is. We can see things about God when we look at what he's made, right? We can understand things about God from what has been made. This is the moonflower. You know where the moonflower grows? It only grows in one place in the world, on the big island of Hawaii. And it only blooms for 2 hours every year under a full moon. Yeah, once a year it blooms for 2 hours. And you think, well, why did God make that? Well, I think he likes it, right? He's like, there's my moonflower. We can learn things about the artist by looking at his art. I know. Even God's sense of humor, right? And another thing that happens when we look at his art is we can also learn about how things work. We see that all these things are working together, right? Yeah. I know. And so as we study all these different things, we can learn things about God, and God can speak to us. He can speak to us from what he's made. He can speak to us in lots of different ways. We'll be talking about that in the morning session that I'm speaking in tomorrow. But we'll talk about different ways that God speaks. He speaks lots of different ways. Now, you know, one thing I learned about these guys, what are they called? Geese? Yeah, you're right, yeah. Are they Chinese geese? No, they're Canada geese. That's right, Canada geese. And did you know one goose, when it flies by itself, it can only fly about 60 miles, and then it collapses. But when it flies together in this V formation, do you know how far it can fly? 10 million. Not 10 million, that's a lot, but it can fly over 3,000 miles. I know. Isn't that amazing? So what do you think God is trying to tell you? You can do it by yourself and only fly like 60 miles. Or you can do it together with him and the people that he's placed in your life, and you'll go a lot further, right? So there's all kinds of things that we can learn that God speaks to us from what he's made. Now, here's the thing about the Bible. Any book is written to help us better understand what the person who wrote it is trying to say and how they think, right? And the Bible was written to point us towards relationship with the Creator. Everybody say relationship. With who? The Creator. What does relationship mean? Being together, connection, friendship. What else? Love, very important. You guys are so smart. What'd you say? Yeah, that's right. And so the whole Bible was written because it points us to relationship with who? With our Creator, right? With our Creator, with God, of course. But God is the Creator. So the one who made the whole earth, the one who made you, and knows everything about you and knows everything about that has ever been, the whole Bible is pointing to the fact that we can have relationship with our Creator. Now, here's the thing about relationships, is that we choose to have relationships, right? If there's somebody at school that you don't know, and they're new to your school, and they're new to the class, and you look at them, and you think, you know what? I should say hi to them. You've just made a choice that you want to go say hi to them, right? And we can choose the people that we want in our lives. We can choose to have a relationship with them, right? And our friends, we can choose who our friends are and who we don't want our friends to be, right? We can choose those things. Well, we can choose to have relationship with God. And we choose to have relationship with God because we want to. And we also know that it will help us, right? I remember when I was 4 years old, and my brother was 7. He's 3 years older than me. And so he was 7 years old, I was 4. My brother was not very nice. And he would always pick on me, and he was always mean to people, and my parents couldn't figure out what to do because he wasn't a very nice person. And one time, we were at this church, kind of like this church here. And the guy that was getting up to speak, he said, he was inviting people. He was saying, does anybody want to give your life to Jesus? He said, why don't you all close your eyes? And so everybody closed their eyes. And he said, is there anybody who wants to give your life to Jesus? Raise your hand. And we were sitting on the very back row, and the lights were kind of dark. It was kind of dark in there. And I saw my brother, and my brother raised his hand. And I thought, ooh, that's interesting, because I had my eyes open. I know. Everybody else is like this. And I said, oh, he raised his hand. You know what? From that day, my brother was totally different. He was a completely different person. He treated me different. He treated me really nicely, treated everybody nicely, was nice to people at school. The teachers noticed the difference. My parents noticed the difference, but they didn't know why, because nobody had seen him raise his hand except for me, because they all had their eyes closed and their heads bowed. Well, so 2 weeks later, I went to my mom. My mom was doing laundry in the laundry room, and I went up to my mom. It was downstairs, and I went up to my mom, and I told my mom that I wanted what my brother had. And my mom said, what do you mean? And she said, well, I mean, we notice he's different, but we don't know why. And I said, well, he raised his hand. And she goes, what? I said, he raised his hand. And she said, what? I'm like, what, am I not speaking English? I'm like, he raised his hand. And then my mom suddenly realized, oh, he gave his life to Jesus. And so she told me, you're too young. So I started to cry, and I ran upstairs to my bedroom, and I threw myself in my bed, and I started crying and crying and crying. My brother came into my room. He said, why are you crying? I said, because Mom won't let me give my life to Jesus. So then he went downstairs, and he said to my mom, he said, Derek's upstairs crying because he won't let him give his life to Jesus. And my mom realized something, that even though I was 4 years old, I had recognized that Jesus made a difference in somebody's life. He made a difference. He made a difference in my brother's life. And I wanted that difference in my life. We choose to have relationship with God because we want to, but we also know that relationship with the Creator is a good idea, right? It's going to help us a lot because we can suddenly have everything that you guys said a relationship was, we can suddenly have that with the person who made us and made everything and knows everything. And so she noticed there was a difference. So she came upstairs and she asked me for forgiveness for saying what she said. And she said, okay, do you want to give your life to Jesus? And I said, yeah. And so you guys know how to do that, right? I just prayed and I said, Jesus, I want you to come into my life, and I give you my life, and I ask you to forgive me for all the things that I have done that have been so horrible at age 4. I couldn't really think of much, but I asked him for forgiveness for whatever I could think of. And then I said, and God, I forgive everybody who hurt me too. And I forgive them. And I said, would you come into my life and be my Savior and also my Lord? And what we're saying when we pray that is we're just saying, Jesus, I know that relationship with you is going to help a lot. And I need that. And so I just ask you to forgive me for all the bad stuff I've done. I forgive people who have done bad stuff to me, and I just ask you to come into my life. And that's what I do. And then how we have a relationship with him is just like how we have a relationship with anybody else. We talk, we listen. What did you say? You said friend, right? Somebody said friend. Who was it that said friend? Like a relationship is a friendship, right? Yeah, exactly. So we talk and we listen. We do things together, right? God and I have done so many things together. I remember telling my brother when I was 5 that I wanted a pulpit, one of these things, for my birthday. And so my dad built me one. And my brother still makes fun of me. He says, you're the only 5-year-old I know that asked for a pulpit for his birthday. And so my dad built me one, and I had it in the corner of my bedroom, and I would preach to millions of people, and they'd all become Christians, and then I'd have to, like, baptize them all. My stuffed rabbit got baptized the most, I think. I would baptize all my stuffed animals. I'd line them all up and preach at them until they gave their lives to Jesus, and then I'd baptize them. And I remember telling the Lord, you know, God, all I want to do is, like, speak and do music and travel. And I've been to 99 countries, and I've done a lot of speaking and a lot of music. Isn't that funny? You know, when we have relationship with our Creator, we get to do things together with Him. And because He made you, He knows all the things that you already love to do. And He knows all the things that you don't like to do. And as you have relationship with Him, you can talk with Him, you can hear Him, He can speak to you, and He can hear you. And then we do things together. And as we get to know Him, we learn all kinds of amazing things from Him. All kinds of amazing things from Him. And He loves to tell us stuff because He knows so much. And because He's a creator, so He's so full of amazing ideas. And that's incredible. It's incredible, all things that we can do. And I'll show you something later on at the end of our time together, not tonight, but like in a couple of nights. All the amazing things. You know, Christians are absolutely amazing. They've done so many amazing things. Did you know, I'll just give you one little hint. Did you know that 68% of Nobel Science winners are Christians? Isn't that something? I know, it's amazing. There's not a single compassion organization in the world that is as big as the ones that have been started by Christians, right? Did you know Christians are the ones by the way, if you were a medical doctor, you should thank Christians because otherwise you wouldn't have a job. Because Christians are the ones who came up with the whole idea of medical system and hospitals and doctors and nurses. That was a Christian. Did you know if you go to public school, you can thank a Christian for that because Christians are the ones who invented public schools. Before that, only rich kids would go to school. And there were some Christians that said, you know what? John Pounds, he said, you know what? Poor kids should get educated too. And everybody laughed at him. And he's the one who came up with public schools. Isn't that amazing? There's so many things Christians have done because as we get to know God, we learn all kinds of amazing things from Him. And one of the most exciting things that we learn from God is we learn something called our identity. And that's what we're going to talk about tomorrow, is identity. Cool? All right, you guys. I love you. I'll see you later.